Good afternoon to all of you. I would normally greet the online people, but I'm told that the streaming service is down this week, so hopefully next week it'll be back up. So it's just us. As Mr. McLean said, my name is Stuart Kelly, and my wife Tammy are new here to this congregation. I've met a few of you, but largely, most of you probably I don't yet know. So before I actually get into speaking on different Bible subjects, which is normally the case, I'm going to give an introductory message today, and it's just basically going to tell you two things: who we are and why we're here, why we came here. So that's the goal of today. Here we go. Look at that; it's already up there. I'm new to this whole technology thing, so back in the olden days, as people like to say, let me move this down a little bit. Or as Billy Joel would say, when I wore a younger man's clothes, they had something in the church called Spokesman's Club. And just out of curiosity, how many of you were in Spokesman's Club or attended a Spokesman's Club? I see a lot of hands out there. Here, let me try this. So I was looking it up, and my old club manual is somewhere in a box somewhere because we're in the process of moving. So I wanted to get a look at what the old manual looked like. And when I did, I figured it out that it wasn't Spokesman's Club. Did you guys know that it wasn't Spokesman's Club? It was actually Spokesman Club. Can you see that? Does it show it up? I don't know if this show's big enough. It's Spokesman Club, singular. But I don't know, probably like you, I always said it's Spokesman's Club. It just makes sense. But anyway, at any rate, I'm referencing the old club format because it was a 12-lesson system, right? And you got through all of the 12 lessons and you graduated, right? So make it black. There we go. And I'm going to ask you, do you remember the name of the first lesson? Does anybody? Feel free to say something. That is exactly what I said. I asked my father-in-law, what was the name of the first lesson? And he said, Icebreaker. And I said, that's right, it's Icebreaker. It wasn't Icebreaker. That was not the name of the first lesson. This was the picture of that first lesson. It was actually called This Is My Life. That was the name of the first lesson, This Is My Life. Basil Wolverton did all of the Bible stories. You know, they had the multi-series with the pictures. Extremely good, but as far as all 12 lessons, he put pretty humorous illustrations for all of the lessons. But on that lesson 1, This Is My Life, and all the other 12 lessons, there was a subheading. And it was always a scripture underneath all 12 lessons. And I'm going to get to that scripture at the end of my message. Let's see. There we go. So anyway, let's see here. Yeah, the purpose of the lesson today is going to be twofold. And that is the purpose of all the lessons in the This Is My Life was twofold. It was to give the speaker, typically when you're joining Spokesman's Club, you've never been in front of an audience before. So it gives the speaker something easy to talk about. But it also lets the audience know who that person is so that for the rest of the 12 lessons, they have an idea who's up there talking. And really, that's kind of what I'm doing here is, before I get into just, jumping out the chute and giving messages, I want you to at least know who Tammy and I are here, and basically, like it showed at the beginning, to give you a handshake, to introduce ourselves. And by the way, pretty sure that's the name of my message, is we're just going to call it a handshake if you like that kind of a thing. So I'm going to give you an idea here on who we are and why we moved here. And for the sake of time, I'm just going to give you the condensed version. Tammy and I were both raised in the church, and her family actually lived in Pasadena at the same time my family did in the early 70s, and they moved away when she was 5 and eventually landed in Oregon. And I stayed in Pasadena right on through, ended up leaving in 91, so I was there all the way through. And being there, I went to, the Ambassador Auditorium Church every week. And I grew up all through high school, worked on landscaping crew at Ambassador College. I served a stint working for ministerial housing, and then eventually I worked for the church in Germany for a few years in the early 80s. And I returned to Pasadena, and when I was 27, there was a ambassador college student. We always had lots of students over to our house. We were very friendly, having people over all the time. And my mom found out that the oldest Smith's girl was a student there at the college, and she actually invited her over and put us together at the beginning of the school year, 1988, and we were married at the end of the school year in 1989. So eventually, obviously, it worked. So that was over 33 years ago. We've been married for 33 years. And after 2 years in Pasadena, we decided that it was time to raise a family, and we moved to be near Tammy's family. And at the time, they were all in Oregon. All of them were in the same area, and eventually they all moved out until just the Kellys were there. All of her family came out here to the Midwest. Can you guess which city the first ones of the family landed in? Indianapolis. Brian and Diana White, that's Tammy's sister, is Diana White. So a lot of you are familiar with them. They attended here at this congregation for a lot of years, and I think most of you probably know by now that Mandy is Tammy's youngest sister. So we came out here 20 years ago, roughly, for their wedding, my first time to the Midwest. And I remember saying very clearly and adamantly, how do people live this way? It was in August. I would never, ever live here. I still haven't experienced a whole August here. We moved here right before the feast. So I haven't lived through what you guys experienced, but I was sure that I would never live in a place like this. It was completely intolerable. So that, in a nutshell, is who we are. Now I'm going to go into the why we moved here. So usually when people pull up roots and cross country, it's for a job, typically. You know, you have a job offer or maybe a job transfer, something like that. That wasn't the case for us. We both had very great jobs that we loved. And for many years, I've looked at major decisions like this decision as far as you have two directions to go when you make a decision. You're either going toward it, to something, or you're moving away from. Usually it's toward something pleasurable and away from something painful. You know, that's how animals work. That's how people, it's just a generalization. Typically people base their actions on more one of the two. You know, either you're that type of person that you're inspired by a goal. So I want to achieve that goal. That's moving toward, or I got to get away from that situation. And that would be more of a moving away mindset. But for us, this was an even mix of both. We have 3 adult children. Let's see. Here we go. This was, my wife put these together for me, and she labeled it for what it was. It was camp. But we have 3 grown children. I have 2 daughters, my sons, Lauren and Kathleen, and then Sean. Next to me is my daughter-in-law, Katie. She runs the kayaking crew at the Northwest Camp. I've run the archery program for the last 7 years. And so we love camp. We're very active in it. And all 3 have been through the Ambassador ABC program. They're all baptized. They're all very active in God's church. So my daughters are in this area, in Cincinnati, that is, and now 2 grandchildren as well. So for us, that is the moving toward part, okay? So the moving away from is something else. So when we moved to Oregon 31 years ago, it was because we wanted to raise a family in a better place. You can understand that. It was a very huge step for us, though, to move up to Oregon, especially for me. I didn't know anyone. Didn't know the area at all. Physically, it's a very beautiful place, moderate climate. But over the years, since I've been there in 91, the leadership of the city and the state has kind of gone downhill quite a bit. It's taken a real turn for the worse. And especially in the last couple of years, the homelessness is just, I don't even know if you can even imagine it living out here where you do, but it's basically everywhere. Everywhere there's some kind of a makeshift tent on every corner. and the lawlessness. And, of course, the whole nation saw the riots of 2020 basically unabated. My mom would call me all the time and say, you got to get out of there, you got to get it. Well, I was in the outskirts. We lived in Hillsboro, which was away from the worst of it, but we still had to come in for church. And I still had work to do, and I had to be around it, and it was encroaching into our outskirts community of Hillsboro. Before we moved, I spoke with a friend who was also leaving the area. They bought a place down in the Carolinas. They, lifelong people of the Portland area, they're getting out. And she looked at me. I remember telling her, yeah, we're seeing the things of society and the direction it's going. And she kind of had this twinkle in her eye, and she looked at me and she said, yeah, you've pitched your tent too close to Sodom. And she was referencing Lot, how eventually he, and especially his wife, became inured to the sinful area that they were living next to. And even more recently, we were at a wedding over in Cincinnati here a few weeks ago. It wasn't actually Cincinnati. It was east of there in Ohio. And there was another couple that had moved to Kentucky, lifelong Portland people, got out. We were just speaking of them. I was speaking with Mr. Creech and a few others, and this couple's name came up. And they were at this wedding. And as it happens, she was at my farewell message. I gave a farewell message in Portland, and she was there for that. And I spoke to you of what I'm talking about now, the twofold reasons for moving, because to pick up roots and leave all your friends and everybody, it's a pretty major thing. So she said, you were telling my story, because they have grandkids, and they also saw that downward spiral that the area was headed in. And she said, you told my story. So I'm telling that story all over again to use to make it clear. And so they're out here now, and I've told Mr. Creecher, we've seen 5 or 6 families just recently that have decided to make the change. And it's not easy, to go to a new place. Don't know any of the freeways. Helen can tell you about that one. So, I make wrong turns, all right? But I learn. I'm a fast learner. So, anyway, I'm figuring the area out. I'm figuring out the areas. And, we're not too old to figure it out. I didn't know a soul, didn't know a neighborhood in 91, but eventually, just like Pasadena, anywhere I went, there was someone I knew, guaranteed. It didn't matter. Any part of town. And so now it's all fresh. It's starting all over again, but we're the same people, so I know it'll go well. Anyway, we want to serve, and we did serve a lot back home. We had many serving opportunities, again, because we knew everybody. I've served since the early 80s on security and ushering. Did sound crew for many years, and have been a regular on the speaking schedule as well. And my wife Tammy was the choir director and the special musics coordinator, and as well as many other things that we did. And we certainly want to become part of our new home. And as I promised, we're going to go to that scripture that was the underlying part of the icebreaker message, but also truly the this is my life message. Boom. That's what it was called. That's lesson 1. And if you can read it, it's Proverbs 18:24. I'll turn with you. Proverbs 18:24. And it's actually, they only quote the first part of that particular scripture, because that was relevant to this lesson 1 lesson. A man who finds friends must himself be friendly. You have to show yourself friendly, just like it says here. It's termed different ways. So again, 31 years ago, I knew virtually no one in Portland, but all of that changed. And when you're you don't have to look like this guy, but when you're a friendly person, you make friends. Now, and that applies in or out of the church. I mean, obviously, we go to different church areas, we go to the feast, you have this spirit bond, right? That's almost an instant thing, but it applies to just your general interactions in the world. Wherever you are, if you're, showing yourself to be unfriendly, you're a lot less apt to make friends. But if you're a friendly person, you're going to make friends. So we see this as a theme of God's people leaving a comfortable situation and going into the unknown. We see it all through the Bible, really. Most notably in Genesis 12, when Abram and his nephew, when they left their comfort zone, right? They're in a city, all your needs are taken care of, and they're going into the unknown, into some place, the wilderness, literally, to live in tents. And Ecclesiastes 3:1 tells us that for everything there is a time and a season, such as moving to new areas. And whenever you're making big moves, and frankly, Abraham was the father of the faithful, and his mindset was spoken of by one of his descendants in Proverbs 3. So let's just back it up to Proverbs 3, and we'll look at Abram's mindset when he got out of that area that he was in. Proverbs 3, verses 5 and 6. By the way, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 is my wife's favorite scriptures. Scriptures. Trust in the Lord, verse 5 of Proverbs 3. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not onto your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. So we prayed about it. We put a lot of trust in God and stepped out to come here. This was a very big deal for us. So, again, Abram was living these when he went west into the unknown. So to wrap this up, here's what we've covered. I've shared with you the condensed version of who Tammy and I are, who we are, why we've moved here. Fundamentally, I've always tried to live by that scripture in Proverbs 18. Tammy has too, I'm sure. And so I will end it here with Proverbs 18, verse 24. A man that has friends must show himself friendly. It's been very nice meeting you.